more likely to watch it as a recording anyway. Oh, look, we are live. Here we are. Hello, everybody. So it is, I am Carole Cadwalladr, but you probably know that if you come via my Substack. And we have the amazing Karen Howe with us today. Oh, look, Karen, I like the fact you've got your book nicely positioned over your right
Yes.
shoulder. And I was saying to Karen is that the idea of these is very much more of a chat rather than a formal interview that really want to keep this informal today. If you have questions, please do drop them in the chat and hopefully I'll be able to see them. And Karen has written this amazing book, Empire of AI. And she did so. You were at MIT Tech Review, weren't you, when you first did the first profile? Is that right, Karen?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
When I
I
put out
remember it.
yeah.
I remember it when it came out, and it was the first profile of this quite mysterious company that had yet to get this sort of global fame. So it was a couple of years before ChatGPT was launched. And this company, there were two very big figures involved with it. One of whom has gone on, as we know, to global notoriety, Elon Musk. And the other is this guy, Sam Altman. And the company has now gone on to become, I mean, I think we can say it's one of the most influential companies on the planet, can't we?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
And you were there, Karen. So you got entry to the company before any other journalist, I think, didn't you?
I got deep access to the company before before the company then kicked me out and never spoke to me after that. But
Tell
at
me
the
about how
time,
you did that. So why did you identify OpenAI as this company that you wanted to profile? And how did you persuade
yeah.
them? How did you persuade them? Oh, hello, would you just let me come and hang out at your offices? What was your trick, Karen?
Well, it was really interesting because at the time, OpenAI was really fashioning itself as a research nonprofit, even though by the time I started profiling them, they had actually started moving away from its nonprofit roots. But it still really projected publicly this ethos of we're focusing on fundamental research, we're more academic than we are a company. And because I was at MIT Technology Review, my remit was actually focused on fundamental AI research. I wasn't actually covering in the business of covering companies. And so I just told them, it seems like there's quite a lot of interesting work that you're doing. They were starting to publish all this research that was getting some kind of attention. They had done that conversion to nest a for-profit arm within the nonprofit. They had struck a deal with Microsoft. So there was sort of a series of events that made me think, okay, this nonprofit company conglomerate thing is starting to feel like it might become more substantially influential within the AI space. And so I just pitched to them, it seems like you might want to reintroduce yourself to the public after having all these changes. And I would be the best person to do that because I'm working on a publication that's really focused on research. You're really focused on research. I have a technical research background, and I can write meaningfully, substantively about the work that you're doing, the core of the work that you're doing. So they really liked that idea and they said, come
So they fell for it.
for 3 days.
So they totally fell for your line. And tell me, before we go into what you revealed, tell me what was their reaction to your piece?
They were deeply unhappy. They felt that I had somehow done a 180 on them. And what had, ultimately happened was I came in quite naive and open-minded about what they were saying. And I wanted to just allow them to speak frankly about what they stated was at face value their mission, trying to build artificial general intelligence for the benefit of humanity. And it sort of became clear through my reporting that that was not what was happening at all. There was much more beneath the surface. And so that's how I ended up writing my profile. They were deeply displeased and they ended up not speaking to me for 3 years.
So there you go. It's interesting, isn't it? And why do you think there was that sort of disconnect with what they were expecting and hoping you'd write about, and then what you actually Do you see what I mean? What was the Yeah, how did, because you, as you said, you went in very open-minded, and what were the things that you sort of saw and experienced that made you think, "Oh, actually, there is something different going on at this company than what they believe or what they're projecting?"
One of the first things that started making me feel a bit odd about the situation was their entire founding narrative mythology was that they were supposed to be an anti-Silicon Valley. They were meant to not develop technology in the commercial interest. They were meant to be open, collaborative rather than competitive, and really focus on fundamental questions that were about ultimately how do you build AI to benefit humanity, benefit society. And the moment I started embedding within the organization, I realized that they were actually highly secretive. They were acting like a typical company. They wouldn't let me go see different things, even though they still said publicly that they were going to publish pretty much all of their research and make everything public. They were incredibly controlling about who I spoke to, when, at what times, what I even saw. Like they wouldn't let me see, they wouldn't let me go into certain parts of the offices because there were just things on whiteboards or screens that I might come across. And it just felt a little bit off to what they described. And so later, after embedding within the company for 3 days, I did a lot more interviews that I sourced myself, not through the communications department. And I would ask people, what are you actually up to? Why is everything so secretive? And people first confirmed to me this is the most secretive organization I've ever worked for. So that seemed a bit odd.
Oh, wow.
And then the second thing that started being revealed was there was really kind of a quasi-religious fervor around the whole project. People talked about AGI, artificial general intelligence, like this was impending, imminent, when most of the scientific field didn't even know if it would ever happen. They would have votes at their company retreats to decide how short of a time frame it would be before AGI arrived. And the average at the time was around 5 years, which was just, so out of the norm of scientific consensus. And they were secretive because, like sources explained to me, they were secretive because they believed that they were on the cusp of developing this civilizationally transformative technology. So that's when it became clear to me that this was not really, and this was not a nonprofit, and it certainly wasn't um, against Silicon Valley ethos. It was very much a product of that environment and having these really highfalutin ideals and this mission and narrative that they told themselves about what they were doing. Um, and I think that was ultimately why they were also really surprised that I ended up being critical of the company, because a lot of the people who joined, just as much as Silicon Valley runs on stories that they tell to the public, I think it's equally as important to understand how much they need to tell a really strong story to themselves, that they are the good character. They are, the champions of the story, bringing forth incredibly positive change and doing this for the benefit of all of humanity. So I think they were just really blinkered by their own story that they told themselves.
I find that so interesting, because there is so it's like that is actually the frame in which it feels to me we should be looking at this moment, at what is happening with AI,
Yeah,
which is there is a battle of narratives taking place. And it
yeah,
is simply, these are just stories. And the story that Silicon Valley is telling about AI, which is the story which is predominant across most of the mainstream media, is just a story. And actually, the counter stories to that, such as the one that you're telling in this book, are as equally valid as a possible story and as outcome. But yet it's absolutely sort of, outweighed by the huge volume of this very it's a cross between tech utopian and tech dystopian, but they're the same story. It's either this terrible thing's going to happen or this amazing thing is going to happen, but it is going to happen and it's inevitable, and
Yeah.
therefore we have to be part of this project. And anything which suggests that that isn't the case is you're just a, forget it, that you're a Luddite and all the rest of it. And I guess, yeah, would you agree with that? And what do you, yeah, what do you make of the fact that we, the public, all of our governments, all of our politicians, or so many journalists are all falling for this story?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right that the storytelling is so critical to understanding how these companies operate. And ultimately, the argument that I make is that we really need to think of these companies as new forms of empire. And a pillar of empire building is the narrative that is wrapped around what they're doing and the consequences of it. Historically, empires always had this banner of we are ultimately engaging in all this plundering and labor exploitation and all expansion, aggressive expansion in the name of progress. Like that was a really critical part of justifying what they did, enabling widespread public support within the British Empire at the time, or within other empires at the time. And that's essentially what is happening in Silicon Valley, is that they're using progress and this imperative to move forward, and this very narrow definition of what progress is, as specifically as like technical advancement or advancement of AI systems, to portray themselves and the quest and why they need all of these resources. And to your point, that there's kind of like this really interesting dynamic of not only do they have a narrative of the utopia, they also have this counter narrative of this dystopia. And ultimately, it's kind of just the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like one of the things that I think is also really clear about the parallel between these companies and empire is that all empires also have a narrative of good versus evil empire. And like the good empire needs to be an empire in the first place, needs to have unfettered access to all of these resources in order to beat back the evil empire that could just be on the precipice of gaining this technology and bringing everyone to dystopia if they were allowed to do that. And ultimately, the conclusion of both of these narratives is that there needs to be a very small group of people that have paramount control over the course of this technology development. And that is why we are in the moment that we are today.
And so I love this thing. So you talking about it as a cult and people signing up to what essentially are cultish beliefs. I mean, that's what AGI is. AGI, in a way, is like it's a fantastical new god that is going to emerge and we're all going to be enthralled to. So talk to me about our dear cult leaders in this. So, and can you talk a bit about this? Because I mean, the thing about OpenAI is the story of OpenAI is the story of two of the most influential and extreme and bizarre characters in Silicon Valley. So Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Can you take it? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people won't know any of that background about Musk and Altman. Can you just go back and sort of how did they meet? How did they come together? When did their big falling out take place?
Yeah, so OpenAI was originally sort of conceived by Sam Altman when he was the president of Y Combinator, one of the most influential startup accelerators in Silicon Valley. And he already knew Musk loosely. Musk knew him loosely because they had been introduced by a mutual acquaintance. And at the time, they had a kind of mutual admiration. Altman said that when he first toured Elon Musk's SpaceX factory, there was a sort of a revelatory moment that he had of, oh, this is what conviction looks like. This is what it takes to build the future. And Musk had sort of also heard a lot about Altman being this young and quite influential and a visionary leader. And so Altman started cultivating Musk's relationship more deeply as he decided that he wanted to create some kind of lab around AI, in part because I think he probably identified that Musk would have a lot more sway than he did in the AI world because Musk had a much bigger name, whereas Altman had mostly built his name in the tech business realm, which AI researchers who were very academic during that period didn't really, care about that. And so he started telling Musk, I've been listening to all the things that you're saying about how AI is scary and it's regulated, and it would be bad if AI was solely developed within for-profit environments like Google, which at the time had a monopoly on AI talent. And Altman said, well, it seems to me that the best solution is that we should actually just form this counter group to do everything that not what Google is doing, to be a nonprofit, to open source everything, be collaborative. And after courting Musk for a while, Musk likes the idea and signs up for the project. And then the two of them decide to co-found OpenAI together.
So, and what year was that, Karen?
That was 2015. So then,
because we
yeah.
kind of like, I definitely, at the time, I remember very definitely falling for this narrative because it was like, well, yes, we can see what Google and Facebook are up to. So, yes, a non-profit, which is a counterweight to this, which is doing it, open source in the public interest. Do you think that they did believe that and it changed? Or do you think this was always, what's your view on that?
Yeah, the thing that I feel like I can say is that they probably believed that they believed it, because I think that's kind of how Silicon Valley runs, is going back to what I was saying, like they have to tell a really good story to themselves about what they're doing and why they are the good guys. And so I think that they probably were doing, what Silicon Valley entrepreneurs have been doing for a while now, which is convincing themselves that this was indeed the best solution and that they were going to save AI development in this way. But of course, then like the other motives start creeping in, whether they themselves realized it or not. But ultimately, it became a clash of power where, as Altman and Musk continued shepherding this organization together, they realized that the specific type of AI development they wanted to approach, which was a scale at all costs type of AI development, would require substantial funds. Therefore, a nonprofit wasn't viable. Therefore, they needed to have some kind of for-profit entity. And then they started butting heads because when they were deciding who should be the CEO of this for-profit entity, both of them wanted to claim that title and they couldn't agree. And ultimately,
so that's the key to it. They both wanted to be the son king of this new amazing company, and that's when they fell out, is it?
That is when they fell out because then, well,
I'm shocked if you're telling me that it's I'm really shocked, Karen. Are you telling me that this is all to do with two men's egos? Is that what you're suggesting?
It is. It's interesting because not only is it driven by ego in this particular story, it's also like that like quasi-religious ideological fervor that kind of drives the whole thing. It's also, I think, a really key element for understanding how, like, what on earth is going on with AI development today. Because it is not quite like social media where it's really just about getting as many users, expanding globally, being the emperor. There is also this civilizing mission effect where, now that Musk talks very badly about Altman, he says things like, I don't like the way that he portrays Altman is not just as an evil character, but also like potentially the demise of civilization. Like the stakes that they've painted are higher than we've sort of ever heard before in the tech industry. And so there is that extra element in addition to the ego of that just toxic belief undergirding everything.
Well, isn't it just sort of like it's beyond ego to messianic? Like
yeah, exactly.
I am the true savior, and only I can save the planet and humanity from certain extinction.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, many people have commented previously about how Musk has always been, the kind of guy who wants to save the world and be like, he wants to be the one to save the world. And I think that is pretty true of every single tech leader today.
Yeah, so can we talk about that though? Because Musk, at least you can say, well, he's built these rockets, which are pretty impressive, and he's got his cars, and they are actually, they were in their own way, game changers. Sam Altman. Now let's talk about him. So I had I had this sort of strange encounter with him a couple of months ago at TED. And the thing I would say about Sam Altman is that on the surface, he's just another dweeby dude. He's not an impressive character. He feels like your kind of bog standard nerdy guy. And there is nothing that on the surface you would go, yes, this is the man who should be saving humanity. And thank goodness we're putting all of our faith into him and his company. Tell me what you make of him.
He is someone that I think he disarms people because of exactly what you were saying, that he doesn't come off as power hungry. He does not come off as arrogant. He does not even come off as someone who wants to dominate anything. He comes off as very normal in a way. But I think that's what ultimately is part of his extremely good persuasive powers. Musk is a very coercive power type of person. Like, he seizes power. Altman's power is that he persuades people to cede him power. And the fact that he comes off as just another guy is part of what makes him so effective at doing that. And he is ultimately, when I was interviewing people for the book, no matter how many, no matter whether people liked him or didn't like him or, loved or hated him, generally they just said that he was really good at painting these stories that would draw people in. And initially when people meet him, they fall under a kind of spell where they really, really want to join whatever venture he's about to work on or give him money for whatever thing that he wants to do, because he crafts these personalized appeals to people that are super effective. And part of it is because, in addition to being disarming, he's also really good at just understanding what people want, what makes them tick. And he can have these really convincing one-on-one conversations where he appeals to your specific motives, drives, what you want to do. And then over time, some people continue to be really fervently followers of his, and other people then end up having dramatic falling outs because they start to realize that whatever he said to them one-on-one is not quite what he's actually doing.
You know what, Karen? So it's really interesting because hearing you talk about that, it's, I think we're used to the idea of that companies are in some ways the reflection of the image of the founders or the people behind them. And so if you the way that you talk about Altman there, which isn't a way I've sort of heard him being talked about before, there's almost a way that you can see ChatGPT being made in the model of him, in that it gives you what it thinks that you want. We're now hearing these stories about agentic AI and this idea that it's going to be this amazing helper who's going to reinforce and give you affirmations and tell you how brilliant you are and sort out your life, and we'll be able to. And it's almost like that idea of we're being seduced into this model of, which is in somehow reflecting we're ceding power to something which we believe is going to give us what we're being seduced into the idea that it can give us what we want and need.
Yeah,
which is
I think it is a very striking parallel. Yeah, this is something that Tim Wu, who wrote the review for my book in the New York Times, also mentioned in the book review that there is this really striking similarity between the way that Altman is often accused of saying what people need to hear and the way that ChatGPT just spews and mirrors back what people need to hear. And of course, we're now seeing some really intense psychological effects of that, where people become so deeply attached, enamored to this thing, and that's the way that people feel. Like, people feel that strongly about Sam Altman too. They either believe that he's, the next messiah, or they vehemently hate him. And I do think that it's kind of the root cause of people's feelings towards Altman and people's feelings towards ChatGPT is quite similar.
But I think, and that's why, to go back to like the framing that you have in the book is so important, which is that actually to get away from the sort of personalities behind this and look at the power structure. And I mean, I think when I gave this talk at TED a couple of months ago, and the part of the reason of why I felt I really wanted to do it, and why I felt that I had to do it, even despite this sort of, I had a lot of nervousness about it, but it was this knowing that Sam Altman was going to be there, and knowing that it was going to be this platform for him to talk about his vision for OpenAI. And so when I started thinking, I was sort of really thinking about how I wanted to frame it. And it does feel, for me, it really, really strongly feels that the way that we are being captured, and we're allowing ourselves, and various companies and governments are allowing themselves to be captured, it does feel like we're being sold into slavery. That this is, it's a massive breach of our, I don't know, sort of selfhood, basically, that these companies are just hoovering up all of our personal information, and they get to do with it whatever they want. And we have no agency around that. And I think the thing which disturbs me so profoundly about it, and why I was so keen to talk to you, is because they shouldn't be able to do that. We have laws. Like, we have laws which are meant to protect us from exactly this kind of incursions and breaches. And we're to use the Tim Snyder term, we're pre-obeying. We're saying, well, okay, it is illegal, but let's do a deal. It's very Trumpian. So I don't know. Can you talk to me about your sort of take on that stuff?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that the way that ChatGPT and generative AI, these chatbot interfaces are continuing and exacerbating surveillance capitalism is really alarming. Like, when you think about what kinds of information people will give ChatGPT that they would never give a Google search, like, people are uploading their medical records to ChatGPT to get ChatGPT's interpretation of something that in normal circumstances you would never give to anyone but your doctor. And previously with Google, no one uploaded their MRI scans or their intimate health records or other kind of mental health information. And this is now becoming a normalized thing that people are just giving up. And there's so many other different facets of intimate information that people are starting to give up that we would have never done with search engine or with social media.
But also, it's not. I mean, to go to this, which is this thing, which is, I mean, anyway, it's one of the things which most appalls me at the moment, is that it's not even a matter of individuals choosing to upload to give these companies this data. So, there's this deal which was struck last week. So the British government has now signed a memorandum of understanding with OpenAI, in which it is going to make available to it all of the data sets in it. And I just, can you yeah, I'm just appalled beyond measure at this thing.
Yeah.
Karen, does this strike you as a good idea?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, it's alarming because, going back to this idea that these companies are empires, ultimately, the only stopgap measure that we really have at the moment, the only arguably higher power than these companies, is the US and UK governments. There really aren't that many other governments around the world that could regulate these companies if they wanted to. And now OpenAI and all of these other companies are striking deals with the exact entities that should actually be holding these companies accountable. And they're replacing essential services with AI models, or at least trying to. And that not only means that these governments are opening up citizen data in order to train these models to then attempt to replace these services, they're also laying off civil workers, and they're also potentially going to give completely false information, because part of the feature of these models is that they are not accurate 100% of the time. And so they're basically just co-opting the government, the one entity that could be counterbalanced to them, while also undermining and gouging out the role that government has been able to play for the public and society building at large. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is, like I finished writing the book before any of this happened, before the Trump administration came into power. And it has been incredibly alarming to just see how this frame of understanding these companies as empire has just come to be more and more true by the day, because they have, at this point, they don't like they've consolidated an extraordinary amount of political and economic power to the point where they're really the apex predator now. There really is no other entity that is sufficiently capable anymore of holding them accountable and forcing them to abide by laws.
Sorry, I thought, I mean, where do you go from that? I mean, this is what I feel like it's so, yeah, I mean, it's so beyond. I mean, I find this thing so, I, yeah, I don't know. I think for many years, in the sort of work that I was doing, is I really felt that that there was agency, that we could change things, that actually we could, it's really, really difficult, but at least we try new things to like try and hold these companies to account, to la la la. And I do feel, I don't know, for me, I suppose it's that, so here in Britain, we don't have Trump. We're not facing the same democratic emergency that the states have. In
Yeah,
the states, we can see how clearly aligned those companies are with Trump, and that is massively alarming in and of itself. But the fact that we here in Britain, with a Labour government, last week
yeah,
voluntarily signed up to this deal with OpenAI, which is essentially, it's like a dojification of the UK government without
yeah,
having to go through all the bother of electing Trump and tearing up the norms, the legal norms. We freely entered into this deal, which is going to make available this massive trove of data, of personal data, of my data,
yes,
everybody else's, to this company, which is, for all the reasons you're talking about, just massively problematic, and
yeah,
that has absolutely no, there is no way of regulating it, of holding it to account, of having transparency into its actions, to knowing if it's any good,
yeah,
for all of these reasons. So we're signing up to a massive technological experiment in which we're going to have no safeguards, and once that data is handed over, that's it. We can't get it back, even
yeah.
if that. So I mean, yeah, am I being alarmist there, or yeah, what I don't know, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was working on this book, I was definitely in a pretty bad mental state of thinking like what is left to be done. But one of the things that I found really remarkable when I was reporting stories of resistance as part of the book as well was that the people who you on the face of it would think had the least amount of agency, like I write about workers in Kenya who were exploited during the development of ChatGPT, and I write about Chilean water activists who had to fight tooth and nail to prevent their water from being taken from data center development that's rapidly proliferating around the globe. And those people are, they're in the global south. They live in impoverished communities in the global south. You would think that they have the least amount of agency. And yet, time and time again, it was actually these groups of people that remembered first and foremost that they still do have agency and were willing to fight back more aggressively than any other groups that I encountered. And with the Chilean water activists, like when they found out that Google was coming to build a data center in their community and take the one public drinking water resource in Chile, because Chile's most of the water is privatized, they they launched this massive campaign just with a bunch of volunteers within this community, knocking on every single neighbor's door, handing out flyers, like telling everyone and their mother who would listen, this is what a data center in our community means. It's going to take all of our like life-sustaining resources and not actually give us economic opportunity. And they escalated because they pushed back so aggressively. They escalated their case all the way to ultimately Google headquarters and the Chilean government. And now they have forced Google and the Chilean government and Microsoft and anyone else that wants to develop a data center in Chile to speak to them. So the Chilean government actually started a roundtable that invites civil society members from all across Chile, particularly in the communities that they were considering opening up for data center development, to come and speak with representatives of the company so that they can actually negotiate. And like, it's not a perfect solution. The water activists were telling me, like they blink once and all their water will be gone. Like they have to stay hyper vigilant. They have to continue pushing back. But the gains that they made were remarkable, just simply because they were like, wait a minute, this is our water and we can actually fight and not pre-obey.
Yeah.
And actually like reclaim this critical resource that these companies need. And so I think the lesson to be learned from that kind of spirit is that there is actually a lot to be done, even when democracy at the top is failing us.
Yeah.
Like we can still have democracy at the bottom. And there have actually been so many movements that I've come across, since while I was reporting the book and since publishing the book, of people that are mobilizing and building these collective action movements, whether it's workers that are starting to push back against any use of AI within their contracts, or whether it's artists that are pushing back by suing these companies, or some journalism publications suing these companies, or whether it's hundreds of communities around the world that are actually pushing back against data center development, like the Chilean water activists. I mean, that is there is actually significant momentum behind trying to contain the unfettered proliferation of these companies.
Yeah, well, thank you for including. That's really amazing that actually you have identified these stories of resistance and fight back. And like you say, I fundamentally believe that as well, that it has to come from a sort of grassroots, bottom up approach. And just to give a shout out to the Citizens, which is a nonprofit which is hosting this chat, which is very much that. It's around building kind of community of action around people who sort of understand and can see the threat of these companies, and trying to formulate ways in which to fight back. Now, to go on to that and to go on to the thing which I've heard you talk about before, which is that these deals which media and news organizations are striking with AI companies, and particularly with OpenAI. So there's a trade magazine in the UK which covers the sort of journalism industry called Press Gazette, and they have a table in which they've been keeping a running log of companies that are suing AI companies and companies which are settling. And it seems to me that that's a really profound divide. And so, sort of famously, one of the best lawsuits out there, which is believed to be the sort of like best constructed and maybe succeed, is New York Times versus OpenAI. They decided. So they basically can see that OpenAI totally harvested all of their work, all of their site, all of their journalism. They fed it into their model, and that has been used to build the product, ChatGPT, that everybody's using. And New York Times has said, no, that's not right. It's illegal under US copyright law, and we're suing. So, another example of another news organization very close to my heart is The Guardian. So, all of my journalism for 20 years has been published on The Guardian's website. And we can now see that that journalism is in ChatGPT's model. I can query anything I wrote, and ChatGPT will serve it back up to me, or will write in the style of Carole Cadwalladr, etc. And, we found at the exact moment that The Guardian gave away a portion of its news organization, The Observer, where I've already worked, they almost, I think it was about a week later, signed a syndication deal with OpenAI.
Right.
Now, they've kept the terms of that syndication deal secret. We don't know how much money it's for. We don't know what the ongoing relationship is. But there's sort of signs. So, for example, the FT, I noticed, who've also done a syndication deal with OpenAI, they talk about OpenAI being a strategic partner. So I mean, I have to say, from a personal point of view, what appalled me about this is that it's normalizing illegal behavior. So
Yeah.
the fact is, we have strong copyright laws in the UK. And from our understanding of what OpenAI has done, is breached those copyright laws. And instead of defending the law and defending the principles which underlie the law, instead these news organisations, which include The Guardian, have, which I understand the rationale behind it, they're being pragmatic. They're saying, well, we're really short of money. It's really difficult to make money out of journalism. Here is a big tech company which is going to give us a chunk of money for this stuff is already done. What's not to like? So, for me, I found this like profoundly unethical, wrong-headed, and also just counter to the very sort of underpinning of journalism, which we should be there to defend the idea of justice and to defend the rule of law, to highlight breaches of it. So yeah, I'm profoundly disturbed by these deals. But Karen, I'm sure you're going to have a much more articulate, thought out version of that. Tell me what it is.
No, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, I was really struck. So I went to the International Journalism Festival at Perugia earlier this year, and I was really struck by the arguments that people made for justifying why we as journalists should strike these deals. One of them, which was, if we don't strike these deals, we won't have a seat at the table. And I came away feeling that there is sort of a lack of investment right now in reporting on these companies, such that the media industry itself has not sufficiently excavated the true culture and spirit of the tech industry and fully understood what kind of who they are making these bargains with. And what I said during the festival was, you cannot have a seat at the table and gain bargaining power with an industry that ultimately doesn't want you to exist. Like, there's no way to have a constructive conversation where you give up a little bit of your data, you give up a little bit of your IP, and you gain something in return. Like, as you mentioned, that data, once it's given up, is theirs. It's gone. That is just power you've fully ceded away. And what are you actually getting? Like, they can play ball with you for as long as they want, and then they can stop when they want to stop, which is what we've seen with Google and Google's news initiative, and with Facebook and all of the partnerships that they did with journalism. The moment that they want to stop, it decimates an entire part of the industry who has become over-reliant on those platforms for their revenue.
Yeah.
And
And also, I mean, it was kind of like, so Sam Altman made this argument to me when I, talked to him backstage at TED. He was like, his argument to me was that, well, we think that ultimately OpenAI will be contributing more money to journalism than anything else. And, going back to those things which you've just mentioned, so things like, which probably people won't know the details of, but the Google News Initiative was something where Google spent millions of dollars with news organizations especially across Europe, but it was with an intention. And it was with an intention to try and shape the narrative around big tech and around regulation. And guess
Exactly.
what? That money has now dried up because Google got what it wanted. And the use of these news organizations is no longer important to it. So there seems to be just like a crushing naivety about the intentionality of this money, and why that doesn't seem to be a factor in the commercial teams which are making these deals.
Yeah, I think there's something maybe misunderstood within the media industry that somehow these deals are reversible. That if you enter the deal and then you don't like it, you can somehow extricate yourself out of it unharmed. But the problem is that you already give all of the fodder for developing those models, and then those models are developed. They don't need you anymore. Like if you extricate yourself out, that you have no bargaining power when you've already seeded the one critical resource that they the deal in to acquire in the first place. So I think, yeah, it's something that I've harped on a lot. Is just in order to understand how to effectively gain a seat at the table, we need to invest more in tech accountability journalism. We need to inform the public and ourselves about who we are actually bargaining with, and only then can you make informed decisions about how to actually negotiate with these entities.
But you can't do it if they're your business partner. So also, you said something, Karen. There was some podcast I was listening to, and I wasn't aware of this research, but you mentioned that there is research that shows that news organizations report less critically on companies in which they have done business deals or taken money from. Is that right?
I think that is highly possible, but I think the thing that I was citing was there's been research to show that Google News Initiative specifically, they would enter markets where regulators were beginning to talk about regulating big tech. So as the Brazilian government started ramping up conversations, Google News Initiative would suddenly enter Brazil and offer the services to all of these newsrooms. And then it was really effective in basically killing the regulation, among other lobbying tactics. But we're seeing OpenAI doing the same thing, taking Brazil as another example. Like as Brazil started being more forward about advancing potential AI regulation, one of the first international policymaking teams that OpenAI hired was a Brazilian one, so that they could effectively try and, and like the fact that OpenAI has started a program where they are explicitly targeting governments. Now it's not even newsrooms, right? Like they're targeting governments directly to say, use our services, become our business partners. Like the playbook was already written and it's plain for NBC.
I know, and which takes me back to, sorry, I could really whinny on about news organizations doing these deals for endlessly, because I find it so short-sighted and so naive. But then, as you said, is that it really is surpassed by the fact that the UK government itself has just done exactly the same deal.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe should we go on to? I mean, like I said, I really could wang on about that, and I do wonder. So, I mean, actually, Karen, maybe I can ask you that question. What do we do? So bearing in mind, as much as, to go back to it, that what's happening in the States is so extreme. But it is coming from the Trump government. In Britain, which is, we're not in the full democratic catastrophe yet. We maybe have a couple more years of interregnum. But what do you think we should be doing? So this thing that this memorandum of understanding, which the UK government has signed with OpenAI, what's your, yeah, what how do you think what do you think we should be trying to do about this, and how urgent is it?
Well, well, with the memorandum of understanding, I think that everyone should be calling their representatives and expressing how deeply angry they are about this particular deal when it comes to this in particular. But I also think that there's plenty to be done, not just with interacting with the government, but also just acting on our own accord in absence of government leadership. Like I was talking about before, how there are all of these movements now that are building up. And the way that I think about it is there is a full supply chain that these AI companies need access to in order to continue what they do. They need land for their data centers. They need electricity. They need water. They need our data. They need intellectual property. They need labor. And then they also need access to all of the spaces in which they're going to end up deploying their technologies. Like, they can't run as a business if people don't buy and subscribe to their services. So that's schools, offices, hospitals. And these are all collectively owned and collectively governed resources and spaces. And so the fact that people are suing these companies over data that these companies took, like, that is pushing back on the access that that company needs to a very critical resource for them to function. And
Mm,
if there's pushback on every single resource, the data, the land, the water, the electricity, the schools, the hospitals, every single one of these resources and spaces at the same time, it would make it very, very difficult for these companies to continue operating as empires.
but it
And
goes back to,
ultimately,
but it goes back
yeah.
to the story, doesn't it? Which is that people don't understand the threat yet, because the counter story has been so massively dominant across sort of all mainstream media. Like, that story's winning at the moment. Like, people don't understand these very real impacts which you're talking about.
What's so interesting? I think actually the average public does really understand it, because I've been looking at a lot of surveys and polls on the sentiment around AI in the last few months. And generally speaking, people are quite down about the technology. But what I think has happened is that the elites, business elites, political elites, they have actually lost touch with public opinion. And they're the ones that are striking the deals. The executives are striking the deals. The government officials are striking the deals. But the broader public actually is pretty much cognizant and wide awake to the fact that technology is not servicing them anymore. They are serving the tech industry. And so that's why I think that ultimately, like, my theory of change has really switched from a top down one to a bottoms up one, where if we can tap into that collective discontent and really continue to vocalize the fact that this is so fundamentally not serving us, not actually bring us to a better place, that will be much more effective than trying to get the elites to
So,
wake
so,
up.
but isn't it? Is there? Do you think there is a sort of bit of a disconnect though with all of us, in that, like, we can see how AI is going to be coming for our jobs? I think young people, especially, are starting to talk about that, starting to worry about that. We can see it's these entry level jobs which are most at risk. But at the same time, people are very much still using ChatGPT to, ask it questions, and not just practical questions or queries, but increasingly people are using it as a therapist or
Yeah,
about their boyfriend questions, aren't they? I mean,
yeah,
there's a sort of, for all that there's a cynicism at the sort of broader societal level, there is also, yeah, but it's just quite handy. And I guess people, we all do that thing of searching. We all have difficult problems and questions we face, and so, like, the idea of turning to a third party who's
yeah.
gonna, I don't know, I mean, yeah, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't use ChatGPT. I encourage people, like, I constantly tell people that is an option. Like, you could just not use the tool. And I actually have come across a lot of people that have actually opted for that option increasingly. And for different reasons. Some of them are taking an ethical stance. Some of them just don't find it useful at all. They ask it about things that they're experts in, realize that ChatGPT just goes totally off the rails on that subject. And it does give me a lot of hope. So I was speaking with a parent of a teenager recently who said that, her teen and all of her teenagers' friends actually hate anything to do with AI, and they're really embracing the neo-Luddite movement. Um, so I do think that there is, you, you're right that like the numbers are going up in terms of like what OpenAI says their daily active or monthly active users are, but there's also equally a lot of momentum and awareness spreading around potentially just not using it because it's not worth it.
And how do you counter? So last week we had an interview with two very interesting people, Carissa Villiers, who wrote this book, Privacy is Power, who's an academic at Oxford, and Roger McNamee, who's I call him like the radicalized VC. He was the one who introduced Mark Zuckerberg to Sheryl Sandberg, and now he's vehemently anti everything that Silicon Valley is doing. And his big thing is that he just considers it a pyramid scheme. He's like, we've seen this so many times, and the amount of capital that's pouring into AI, it can never see a return. It's just another bubble. It's like, it doesn't even work. Will it ever reach AGI? What does that mean? He's very skeptical about the whole thing. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think Roger is absolutely right that the technology is just not it is not living up to, from a technical perspective, it does not live up to what the companies say the capabilities of these tools are. Therefore, all of the things that they're telling investors will come to pass about how it's going to lead to dramatic economic growth, all of these increases in productivity, efficiency, so on and so forth, is just not going to happen. And so the bubble will burst at some point. And I think there's so many different, going back to the empire analogy, empires feel inevitable. That is a feature of what they are, but they're actually also very weak at the foundations. And it kind of just takes a recognition of that for it to start crumbling quite rapidly, which is why historically every empire has fallen. And I think that this empire is no different in that there are so many reasons why it's weak at the foundations. The economic case against it is just one of the many different facets of why it's just not sustainable. And so that is what gives me optimism and hope and energy to continue kind of speaking about these issues, providing that counter narrative. And I have been really heartened by the number of people that I come across during my talks, who have read my book, who email me, who say like, you have finally articulated to me exactly why I felt so bad about this whole thing. So there is sort of a latent, like, people just need the vocabulary and a frame to understand what they actually already know.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's sort of like talking about empire here, sitting here in Britain. Britain hasn't dealt with its post-imperial legacy. It hasn't reckoned with the iniquities that it's forced upon the world, and the sort of counter sort of force to that, which is the sort of Nigel Farages and the right wings who absolutely don't accept that model of history, is very much in the, is in force in Britain. That they're the ones who again are controlling the narrative. Do you, does that feel like a problem in terms of understanding? Like, it's a very niche group of people, it seems, who actually do understand the historically, the evils of empire. Is that a barrier to like understanding these AI companies in that structure, when we can't even accept like the basics of the way that the British state and other states have um used this power structure in the past?
I don't know that it's actually a niche group of people. When I was in doing my book tour in the UK, not a single person pushed back on the empire being not good. um and you know, like I actually was more I wondered whether or not the empire framing would tap into a US audience effectively,
Yeah.
because the US just has a very weird relationship with empire. It's, you never learn about the history of colonization in school, other than the fact that the US was 13 colonies and then shed the British Empire. But there's also such a huge amount of conversation now happening around empire in the US as well. And so it has been like I've received very, very little pushback on this framing, and on the critique, like the embedded critique of empire within, my broader argument. I think people actually have readily understood and resonated with that a lot because of um, yeah. So I mean, obviously, like the public conversation has been so deeply polarized, and there is the rise of the far right in many different parts of the world. But at the same time, I think like the younger generations, and there are so many more people that are activated because of what's happening in the US and because of, um,
Gaza.
yeah, exactly. That people are actually starting to reckon with empire in a new way, that they never have before.
Mm.
Um, And yeah, so I actually don't think it's niche at all. I think I really think that it is a growing. And this is it's a bit of a silly metric, but like one of my favorite podcasts is the Empire podcast that's
Yeah.
co-hosted by William Dalrymple and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and like they have like, I don't know, 1 million listeners, like that like people
Mm.
are really resonating with wanting to learn more about the real history of what empire did and connecting it to modern day events.
Mm.
Um, so it's not perfect, but I think we are kind of,
Mm.
people are eager to educate themselves.
Okay. Well, listen, that gives me an idea for another conversation we should have. Should we get William Dalrymple in? Like, that would be
Yes.
actually really interesting. Um, so listen, Karen, thank you so much for that. That was really fascinating. And yeah, it feels like it's such a rich topic. And so let's keep in touch, and it'd be really good to talk some more. They did have, you know what? I could see some questions coming into the chat. Oh, actually, I've realized now how I can read them. I'm really sorry, everybody. I haven't really got to grips with the Substack technology. But maybe, I tell you what, maybe I can send you some of those questions afterwards and we can do a follow up. But thanks so much, Karen. I really appreciate it, and really look forward to seeing what you do next. And thanks everybody. Thanks everybody who's joined us. Really appreciate that. And I'll send a recording and a transcript round afterwards as well. Okay. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think you have to end the record. Oh no, here we go. There we go. End. There we go.